In the shadows of America's westward expansion lurked darker truths than your history books dare reveal. When Rebecca Collins buried her husband on their remote Colorado homestead in 1876, she discovered a truth that shattered her world. Her husband's death was no accident. What he knew, what he discovered in those mountains, had marked them both for elimination. "Burn everything," the letter had instructed. "Tell no one what you found. They're watching the cabin." In the untamed West, a widow alone was considered fair game, prey for land grabbers, corrupt officials, and men with secrets to protect. For Rebecca Collins, the vultures were already circling, waiting to claim what remained of her life. But history forgot one crucial detail from those dangerous days. Sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected places and from the most unexpected men. Get inside before they see you. What follows is the story they didn't want told, of unexpected alliances, buried secrets, and how one black rancher's courage changed the fate of a frontier town forever. If you're new to the Black Rancher channel, you've just stumbled upon America's hidden history, the powerful stories of black heroes who shaped the western frontier against impossible odds. These aren't the sanitized tales from your textbooks. These are the raw, unfiltered accounts of courage they tried to erase. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring that notification bell, because the story you're about to hear exposes truths about our shared past that powerful forces hoped would stay buried forever. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end. The final chapter reveals a shocking twist that connects directly to events that changed American history. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1 of Get Inside Before They See You. Colorado Territory, November 1876. The first snowfall of winter descended on Widow Collins' cabin like a shroud. Rebecca Collins stood at her husband's grave, the fresh mound of earth already dusted white. At 32, she had expected many things from frontier life, but widowhood hadn't been among them. Thomas Collins had been found at the bottom of a ravine 3 days earlier, his neck broken from what everyone called a tragic riding accident. Rebecca knew better. Thomas had been born in the saddle, and the look of terror frozen on his face when they brought his body home told a different story. "You should sell," Marshall Clayton had suggested at the funeral. "A woman alone can't manage a homestead. I know people willing to offer fair price." Rebecca had said nothing. The land claim, 160 acres of pristine Colorado wilderness with a creek running through it, had been Thomas's dream. Now it was all she had left of him, along with a half-built cabin and dwindling supplies. As dusk approached, Rebecca reluctantly turned from the grave. The temperature was dropping rapidly and the snowfall growing heavier. Tomorrow, she would need to split more wood and check the snares Thomas had set before his death. Tonight, she would allow herself to grieve. She had barely reached the cabin when the sound of approaching riders reached her ears. Quickly, she ducked inside, grabbing Thomas's Winchester rifle from above the door. Through the small window, she counted 3 men on horseback, emerging from the tree line. Rebecca recognized the lead rider immediately, Marshall Clayton, his silver badge gleaming even in the fading light. The other 2 were strangers, their faces partially obscured by scarves against the cold. "Mrs. Collins," Clayton called out, "just checking to see if you're faring well." Rebecca didn't respond. Thomas's last words to her echoed in her mind. "Trust no one, Becca, especially not men with badges." "Mrs. Collins," Clayton called again, dismounting. "It's bitter cold out here. Might we warm ourselves at your fire?" The men moved toward the cabin. Rebecca's finger tightened on the trigger. They were 10 paces away when a voice called from the darkness. "Evening, Marshall. Didn't expect to find you up this way." A 4th rider emerged from the trees, a tall black man on a powerful dark horse. He wore no heavy coat despite the snow, just a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt. A Winchester rifle rested casually across his saddle. Clayton froze. "Freeman, what brings you to these parts?" "Same as you, I expect," the man called Freeman replied, his deep voice carrying easily through the still air. "Checking on Mrs. Collins after her loss. Thomas was a friend." Rebecca stared in confusion. Thomas had never mentioned a friend named Freeman, certainly not a black one, "This isn't your territory, Freeman," one of Clayton's companions said, his hand drifting toward his holster. "Last I checked, Burke, free men can ride where they please," Freeman replied calmly, though his eyes, even from a distance, were anything but calm. A tense silence followed, broken only by the soft sound of falling snow. Finally, Clayton forced a smile. "Another time, then. Mrs. Collins will call again tomorrow. You think on my offer." The three men remounted and rode back the way they had come, occasionally glancing over their shoulders at the lone rider who remained. Once they were out of sight, Freeman dismounted and approached the cabin slowly, hands visible. "Mrs. Collins," he called softly, "I know you've got a rifle trained on me, and that's sensible. But you should know those men will be back, and next time they won't be deterred so easily." Rebecca hesitated, then cracked open the door, keeping the Winchester leveled. "Who are you? Thomas never mentioned you." "Elijah Freeman. I own the Double Springs Ranch, about 10 miles east." He tipped his hat respectfully, but remained at a distance. "Your husband and I weren't friends in the usual sense, but we shared concerns." "What concerns?" Freeman glanced toward the departing rider's trail. "The kind that get men killed when discussed in the open." His eyes met hers, intense and urgent. "Get inside, Mrs. Collins. Before they see you, we need to talk, and these woods have eyes." Something in his voice, a genuine concern that had been absent from Marshal Clayton's false solicitousness, made Rebecca lower her rifle slightly. "Why should I trust you?" Freeman reached slowly into his vest and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "Because Thomas gave me this, a week before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I was to make sure you got it." Rebecca's heart pounded as she recognized her husband's handwriting on the outside. For Rebecca, should the worst happen. She stepped back, allowing Freeman to enter. As he crossed the threshold, snow swirling in behind him, Rebecca felt as though she were crossing a threshold of her own, from the life she had known into something darker and more dangerous. Freeman secured the door behind him, then moved to the window, peering out into the gathering darkness. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "And next time they won't be alone." The cabin felt smaller with Elijah Freeman's tall frame occupying it. Rebecca lit a lamp and placed it on the rough-hewn table, keeping a cautious distance from her unexpected visitor. "You claim Thomas gave you that letter," she said, gesturing to the folded paper. "Prove it." Freeman handed her the letter without hesitation. "Your husband was a brave man, Mrs. Collins. Braver than most would credit." Rebecca broke the wax seal and unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. Thomas's familiar handwriting leapt out at her. "My dearest Becca, if you're reading this, then what I feared has come to pass. I've discovered something in the northern ridge, something that powerful men would kill to control. I've entrusted copies of my findings to Elijah Freeman, the only man I know who can't be bought or intimidated. The deed to our land is hidden in the false bottom of the flour barrel. There's also a map. Show it to no one but Freeman. Trust him, Becca. He's a good man in a territory with precious few of them left. All my love." Thomas. Rebecca looked up from the letter, her eyes swimming with tears. "What did he find?" Freeman's expression remained grave. "Gold, but not just any gold. A vein richer than anything they've found in these mountains. Your husband was a geologist before he came west, wasn't he?" Rebecca nodded. "He taught at a university in Boston. Said he'd had enough of classrooms, wanted open sky. He knew what he was looking at then. That's why they killed him." "Who killed him?" "The same men who just paid you a visit. Clayton, Burke, and Reynolds represent interests out of Denver, men who've been buying up land claims all through these mountains by whatever means necessary." Rebecca sank into a chair. "They made it look like an accident." "They usually do." Freeman's voice carried the weight of personal knowledge. Rebecca studied him properly for the first time. Elijah Freeman was tall, with broad shoulders, and hands calloused from hard work. His face bore the weathered look of a man who spent his life outdoors, with lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting he was in his early 40s. But it was those eyes themselves that held her attention, dark, intelligent, and carrying a profound weariness. "Why would Thomas trust you?" she asked bluntly. "No offense intended, but I'm black. And this is 1876 Colorado, Freeman finished for her. Your husband and I met 2 years ago when I was driving cattle north. He helped me when one of my men was injured. Didn't care about the color of my skin, just that a man needed help. He turned back to the window, checking the darkness outside. Later, when he realized what he'd found in those mountains, he came to me. Said if trouble came, I was the only one outside their reach because they'd never suspect a black rancher of being worth bribing or threatening. Rebecca rose and moved to the flour barrel, prying up the false bottom Thomas had constructed. Inside lay the deed to their homestead and a carefully drawn map, marked with annotations in Thomas's precise hand. She spread the map on the table. What do we do now? First, we get you somewhere safe. You can't stay here tonight. I'm not abandoning our claim, Rebecca said firmly. This land was Thomas's dream. I'm not suggesting you abandon it, but Clayton and his men will be back before dawn, and next time they won't be asking politely to warm themselves by your fire. Rebecca knew he was right. She had seen the look in Clayton's eyes, the cold calculation of a predator sizing up easy prey. Where would I go? My ranch. I have a cabin no one uses anymore. Belonged to my foreman before he built himself a proper house. It's small but solid. And then what? Freeman traced a finger along the map to the spot marked with Thomas's careful X. Then we figure out exactly what your husband found and why they were willing to kill for it. Rebecca began gathering essentials, clothes, food, Thomas's papers. As she worked, a question nagged at her. Mr. Freeman, why are you helping me? This isn't your fight. Freeman was silent so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. 10 years ago, they murdered my brother for his claim near Silver Creek. Made it look like Indians did it. By the time I learned the truth, the killers were respected businessmen in Denver, and my brother was just another forgotten casualty of frontier justice. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw a controlled anger that had never died. So you see, Mrs. Collins, this has been my fight for a very long time. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing their tracks even as they prepared to make new ones. The journey to Double Springs Ranch was arduous. The snow fell steadily, reducing visibility and turning the mountain paths treacherous. Rebecca rode behind Freeman on his powerful stallion, clutching her small bundle of possessions. How much further? She asked through chattering teeth. Despite the heavy coat Freeman had insisted she wear, his own, the biting cold had seeped into her bones. Not far now, he replied, just beyond that ridge. As they crested the hill, Double Springs Ranch spread out below them. Even in the darkness, Rebecca could make out the substantial main house, a large barn, and several smaller outbuildings. A corral held horses huddled together against the cold, and beyond that stretched fenced pastures now blanketed in white. You built all this? She asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Over 12 years, Freeman replied. Started with 20 acres and a tent back in '64. Now it's 300 acres and the finest horse stock in 3 territories. They rode down to the main house where a warm light glowed in the windows. As they approached, the door opened and a young black woman hurried out, wrapped in a shawl. Mr. Freeman, we were getting worried with this storm coming in. Her eyes widened at the sight of Rebecca. Who's this? Sarah, this is Mrs. Collins. She'll be staying with us for a while. Can you get the small cabin ready? And perhaps some hot food? Of course. Sarah's curious gaze lingered on Rebecca, but she asked no questions as she hurried back inside. Sarah and her husband Daniel helped me run the ranch, Freeman explained as he helped Rebecca dismount. Good people, trustworthy. Do they know about... Rebecca trailed off. No, and for their safety it's best they don't. Freeman led her to a small but well-built cabin about 50 yards from the main house. Inside it was spare but clean, with a stone fireplace, a bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a small kitchen area. It's not much, he said, lighting a lamp. It's more than enough, Rebecca replied sincerely. After the events of the day, any safe harbor seemed luxurious. Sarah arrived minutes later with blankets, firewood, and a pot of stew. She efficiently built a fire, then left the 2 alone after assuring them that hot water for washing would follow shortly. As the cabin began to warm, Rebecca felt the full weight of exhaustion descend upon her. She sank onto one of the chairs, struggling to keep her eyes open. "You should rest," Freeman said, moving toward the door. "We'll talk more tomorrow." "Wait," Rebecca called. "You never finished telling me. What exactly did Thomas find?" Freeman hesitated. "From what he told me, it's not just gold. It's a massive deposit, possibly the richest ever found in these mountains. But there's more to it." "What do you mean?" "The land it's on, your land, also controls the watershed for half the territory. Whoever owns it controls the water rights. In mining country, that's more valuable than gold itself." Rebecca understood immediately. Thomas had often spoken about the importance of water in the West, how miners and ranchers alike lived and died by access to it. So they killed him for water rights and for the gold, but mostly because Thomas was going to file a report with the territorial governor about illegal water diversion that was poisoning streams with mining runoff. Clayton and his associates have been allowing mining companies to dump arsenic and mercury into tributaries, killing livestock and making people sick downstream. "How do you know all this?" "Because I've lost cattle to poisoned water. Many ranchers have. But no one would listen to our complaints, certainly not to mine." The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. Rebecca thought of Thomas, passionate about the natural world and fiercely protective of it. Of course he would have stood against such destruction, and it had cost him his life. "Tomorrow," Freeman continued, "I need to ride into town for supplies. We should also send a telegram to the territorial governor. Thomas had a contact there he trusted." "I'll go with you," Rebecca said. Freeman shook his head firmly. "Too dangerous. Clayton's men will be watching for you. Besides, you're exhausted." He was right, but Rebecca hated feeling helpless. "What can I do then?" "Rest. Recover your strength, and go through Thomas's papers, see if there's anything else that might help us understand exactly what we're facing." With that, he bid her good night and left. Rebecca ate some of the stew, grateful for its warmth, then collapsed onto the bed without even removing her boots. She dreamed of Thomas, falling endlessly into a dark ravine, his voice calling out warnings she couldn't quite hear. Rebecca awoke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's small window. For a moment, she was disoriented, until the events of the previous day crashed back into her consciousness. Thomas, dead. The threat at her cabin. The escape with Freeman. A knock at the door startled her. Sarah entered with a tray of food and a steaming pitcher of water. "Mr. Freeman asked me to bring you breakfast," she said, setting down the tray. "He rode out at first light. Said to tell you he'll be back by sundown, and not to worry." "Thank you," Rebecca said, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. "And thank you for your hospitality." Sarah smiled, but concern showed in her eyes. "Mrs. Collins, I don't mean to pry, but are you in some kind of trouble?" Rebecca hesitated. Freeman had warned against involving others, but she sensed genuine concern from the young woman. "My husband died recently," she said carefully. "There are complications regarding our land claim. Mr. Freeman is helping me sort them out." Sarah nodded. "Mr. Freeman is a good man. If he's helping you, you can trust him." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Mrs. Collins? There were men in town asking questions yesterday about a widow up in the mountains. Daniel overheard them at the general store." Rebecca's blood ran cold. "What kind of questions?" "Wanting to know if anyone had seen you, where you might go. They were offering money for information." Sarah's expression hardened. "Daniel didn't say a word, of course." "None of us would, but be careful." After Sarah left, Rebecca tried to eat, but her appetite had vanished. The net was already closing around her. How long before Clayton's men thought to check Freeman's ranch? With nothing else to do, she turned to Thomas's papers, which she'd brought bundled inside his old surveyor's case. There were maps, geological reports, and personal notes spanning the 2 years they'd lived on their claim. She spread them across the small table, looking for anything that might help. In a small notebook, she found an entry dated just 2 weeks before Thomas's death. 15. Confirmed presence of extensive gold deposits in North Ridge. Estimated value exceeds anything previously documented in the territory. More concerning is the evidence of mercury poisoning in the creek below Clayton Mining Company's operations. Water samples show levels fatal to livestock and dangerous to humans. Have documented findings and prepared report for Governor's office. EF has agreed to deliver it personally if necessary. EF Elijah Freeman. So Thomas had indeed trusted him completely. The next entry chilled her. Octiwa. 20. Received visit from Clayton today. Claims routine patrol but asked pointed questions about my surveys. Caught sight of Burke watching cabin from Ridge later. They suspect something. Have hidden copies of all documentation in case of trouble. Told Rebecca nothing to protect her, but fear this may have been a mistake. If anything happens, she must know the truth. The final entry was dated just 3 days before his death. Octines 27. No longer safe here. Spotted Clayton's men following me today. Will ride to Double Springs tomorrow to consult with Freeman. Decision made. Must get evidence to Governor immediately. Too many lives at stake to remain silent. He never made it to Freeman's ranch that day. Instead, he'd ended up at the bottom of a ravine with a broken neck. Rebecca wiped tears from her eyes, anger replacing grief. Thomas had died trying to protect people from powerful men who poisoned the land for profit. She would not allow his death to be in vain. A plan began to form in her mind. It was reckless, perhaps even foolish, but sitting and waiting had never been her nature. If Freeman returned with news that the telegraph lines were being monitored, as she suspected they might be, they would need another way to get Thomas's evidence to the territorial governor. And Rebecca intended to be ready. When Elijah Freeman returned that evening, his expression told Rebecca everything she needed to know before he'd spoken a word. "They're in town," he said grimly, removing his snow-dusted hat as he entered the cabin. "Clayton, Burke, Reynolds, and at least 4 others I didn't recognize. They've got men watching the telegraph office and the stagecoach station." "So we're trapped," Rebecca said. "Not trapped, just temporarily restricted in our options." Freeman accepted the coffee she offered, his hands red and stiff from the cold. "I did manage to get a message to an old friend, a Ute tracker, who sometimes does work for me. If anyone can get a message through to the governor without being seen, it's Ghost Horse. Can he be trusted?" Freeman's mouth quirked in a half-smile. Clayton's mining operations displaced his people from their traditional hunting grounds and poisoned their water. Ghost Horse has more reason to hate those men than either of us. Rebecca showed him what she'd found in Thomas's papers, particularly the water testing results that documented dangerous levels of mercury and arsenic. "This is it," Freeman said, examining the careful charts and notes. "This is what got him killed. With these numbers, the territorial governor would have no choice but to shut down Clayton's operations." "And arrest the men responsible?" Freeman's expression turned cynical. "That I can't promise. Justice works differently for men with money, but at least it would stop the poisoning." Rebecca took a deep breath. "I've been thinking. They're watching for you, and they're watching for me. But there's someone they might not be watching for." Freeman looked up sharply. "Who? Sarah or Daniel? If one of them could take Thomas's evidence—" "No." Freeman's response was immediate and firm. "I won't put them in danger. But we're running out of options. If your Ute friend doesn't come through, then I'll find another way," Freeman insisted. "But I didn't help Daniel and Sarah escape Tennessee to freedom just to risk their lives now." Rebecca hadn't known this piece of Freeman's history, but it explained the loyalty she'd observed between them. "I understand," she said quietly. "I wouldn't want anyone else hurt because of me." Freeman's expression softened. "It's not because of you, Mrs. Collins. It's because of men who think their greed matters more than other people's lives." A comfortable silence fell between them as they sipped their coffee. Rebecca found herself studying Freeman's face in the firelight, the strength in his features, the intelligence in his eyes, and the deep lines that spoke of hardships she could only imagine. "May I ask you something, Mr. Freeman?" He nodded. "How did you come to own such a successful ranch? It couldn't have been easy for a black man to establish himself out here." Freeman was silent for a long moment. "No, it wasn't easy." He set down his cup. "I came west in '63 during the war. Had been a slave in Kentucky Escaped north when I was 17. Fought with the Union Army until I took a bullet at Vicksburg." He rubbed his left shoulder unconsciously. "When I recovered, I knew I didn't want to go back east. Too many memories, too much hatred on both sides. Out here, a man might be judged for his color, but he could also be judged by his work, his word, his courage. You started with nothing. $20, a lame horse, and a Navy Colt." He smiled slightly at the memory. "Worked cattle drives, saved every penny. Won my first good horse in a poker game from a man who thought a black man wouldn't know cards." Rebecca smiled at this, imagining a younger Freeman outsmarting a prejudiced gambler. "Bought my first 20 acres in '64 from an old trapper heading back east. Paid fair price, got proper papers. That's important out here. Having papers no one can contest." "And you built all this yourself?" "Had help. Daniel and Sarah came 3 years later. Then others, men who'd fought in the war, former slaves looking for a fresh start. Some stayed, some moved on. But we built something good here." His pride was evident, and Rebecca found herself deeply moved by his story. She had never given much thought to what it might mean to be a black man in this country, building a life against such odds. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent knock. Daniel burst in without waiting for a response, his face taut with alarm. "Riders coming, Mr. Freeman, at least 6 of them, armed." Freeman was on his feet instantly. "How far?" "Just crossed the south pasture. 5 minutes, maybe less." Freeman turned to Rebecca. "Get your coat. Daniel, take Mrs. Collins to the root cellar behind the main house. Sarah knows to let you in." "What are you going to do?" Rebecca asked, hurriedly gathering Thomas's papers. "Buy you time. If things go bad, Daniel knows a trail through the back country. He'll get you to safety. I won't leave you to face them alone." Freeman's expression was implacable. "This isn't a debate, Mrs. Collins. Those men have killed once already. I won't give them a second victim." Before she could protest further, Daniel was pulling her toward the door. The last glimpse she had of Freeman was him checking his rifle, his face set in grim determination. Daniel led her quickly through the darkness to the main house, where Sarah was waiting by a concealed door set into the ground behind the smokehouse. They hurried down into a spacious root cellar, where preserves lined the walls and sacks of potatoes and apples were neatly stored. "Stay here," Daniel whispered. "No matter what you hear, stay quiet." He closed the door, leaving Rebecca and Sarah in the dim light of a single lantern. Rebecca could hear her own heart pounding in her ears. "They'll kill him," she whispered, anguished. Sarah's face was calm, though her eyes betrayed her fear. "Mr. Freeman has faced down worse than this." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've known him 15 years, and I've seen what he's survived." Sarah's voice carried absolute conviction. "When Daniel and I fled north, slave catchers caught us in Missouri. They'd have taken us back to our master, or worse, if Mr. Freeman hadn't intervened." "What did he do?" "Bought us. Spent every dollar he had then to purchase our freedom papers. We were strangers to him, but he couldn't stand by and watch us taken. That's the kind of man he is." From above they heard the sound of approaching horses, then men's voices. Rebecca strained to make out words but could discern only the rumble of conversation, then Freeman's deeper voice responding. The conversation continued for several minutes. Then, suddenly, a shout. The unmistakable sound of a gunshot cracked through the night. Rebecca gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sarah gripped her arm tightly. More shouting followed, then a volley of gunfire that seemed to go on forever. Rebecca's world narrowed to the sound of it, each shot a physical pain. She had already lost Thomas. Now Freeman, who had risked everything to help her, would die too. The gunfire ceased abruptly. Footsteps sounded overhead, moving around the property. "They're searching," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Minutes stretched like hours as they huddled in silence. Then came the sound of horses again, moving away this time. Still, they waited. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the root cellar door opened. Daniel looked down at them, his face streaked with soot. "They're gone," he said. "You can come out." Rebecca scrambled up the ladder. "Mr. Freeman, is he—" "Alive," Daniel assured her, "but hit. "Sarah, we need your healing skills." They rushed to the main house where Freeman lay on a sofa, his shirt torn away from a bloody wound in his left shoulder. His face was grey with pain, but his eyes were clear. "Mrs. Collins," he managed, "you're safe." "What happened?" she demanded, kneeling beside him. "Clayton and his men," Freeman grimaced as Sarah began cleaning his wound, "claimed they were looking for a fugitive. You. I told them I hadn't seen any white woman. They called me a liar." "Then the shooting started?" Freeman nodded. "Burke lost patience, Drew first, shot went wild, then it was complicated." Daniel provided the rest of the story. "Mr. Freeman dropped 2 of them before they knew what happened. I got one from the barn loft. The others scattered, dragging their wounded." "They'll be back," Freeman said, wincing as Sarah probed his wound. "With more men. We need to move quickly." Rebecca was stunned by his focus even while injured. "You need to rest." "No time," he cut her off. "Clayton knows now that Thomas's evidence is here. He'll burn this whole ranch to the ground to get it." "The bullet passed clean through," Sarah reported. "If infection doesn't set in, he'll heal." Freeman struggled to sit up. "Daniel, hitch the wagon. We need to evacuate everyone." "To where?" Daniel asked. "Ghost Horse's people have a winter camp in the high country. They'll shelter us until we can get word to the governor." Rebecca suddenly remembered the papers she'd been clutching throughout the ordeal. "Wait, there's something in Thomas's notes you need to see." She spread out a map her husband had annotated extensively. Thomas discovered that Clayton doesn't actually own the water rights he's been selling to miners. The original grant from the territorial government specified that those waters were reserved for the Ute tribe in perpetuity. Freeman studied the document, then looked up at her with newfound respect. "This changes everything. With this, we don't just have evidence of poisoning, we have proof of fraud." For the first time since Thomas's death, Rebecca felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps justice was possible after all, but as Daniel and Sarah hurried to prepare for evacuation, and Freeman struggled to his feet despite his injury, Rebecca knew their ordeal was far from over. Clayton and his men would return, and next time they would come prepared for war. Dawn broke clear and cold over Double Springs Ranch. The night's evacuation had been swift and efficient, a testament to Freeman's preparation and his people's resilience. The ranch hands, their families, and the most valuable livestock had been relocated to hiding places in the surrounding hills. Only Freeman, Daniel, and Rebecca remained, preparing for one final stand. "The wagon is loaded," Daniel reported, entering the main house where Freeman sat checking his weapons. "Extra ammunition, food, water, all of Mrs. Collins' documents." Freeman nodded. "Good. Ghost Horse should be at the meeting point by noon. Once you deliver Mrs. Collins and the evidence safely to his people, ride for Fort Collins. There's a lieutenant there, James Harper, who served with me during the war. Tell him what's happened." "What about you?" Rebecca asked, though she already knew the answer. "I'll buy you time," Freeman said simply. "Clayton's men will follow my trail east, while you head west to the Ute camp." "That's suicide," Rebecca protested. "It's strategy," Freeman corrected her. "I know these mountains better than Clayton ever will." Rebecca looked to Daniel for support, but his expression was resigned. This was not the first impossible situation he had faced alongside Freeman. "There has to be another way," she insisted. Freeman regarded her with a mix of admiration and regret. "Mrs. Collins, Rebecca, I've spent my life building this ranch, this home. Everything I have is here. If I run now, I'll never get it back. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are poor." Rebecca understood then. This wasn't just about her or Thomas's evidence. This was Freeman defending the life he had built against men who believed he had no right to it. "Then I'm staying too," she declared. Both men started to object, but Rebecca raised her hand. "My husband was killed because he stood against these men. I won't dishonor his memory by running while someone else fights my battle." Freeman studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Daniel, change of plans. You'll ride east, laying a false trail, then circle back to Fort Collins. Harper needs to know what's happening here." Daniel looked torn. "Mr. Freeman, we need the army, Daniel." "That's our best hope now." Reluctantly, Daniel agreed. After a brief but emotional farewell to his wife, who had already departed with the others, He rode out, following the route Freeman had outlined. Left alone in the main house, Freeman and Rebecca set about preparing their defense. Freeman moved with the efficiency of a man who had spent years planning for just such a scenario. 6 rifles positioned at different windows, he explained. Move between them, fire, then move again. Makes them think there are more defenders. I'm not much of a shot, Rebecca admitted. You don't need to hit anything, just make noise, keep them cautious. As they worked, Rebecca found herself studying Freeman again. Despite his injury, he moved with purpose and confidence. There was no fear in him, or if there was, he kept it buried deep. How do you do it? She asked suddenly. Freeman looked up from loading a shotgun. Do what? Stay so calm. These men want to kill you. They've already burned your barn, they shot you, yet you act like this is just another day's work. Freeman was quiet for a moment, considering her question. When you've lived your whole life knowing that any white man could decide your fate on a whim, that your very existence offends some people, you learn to control your fear. You have to. He checked the shotgun's action, then continued. First time I faced down armed men, I was 19. Slave catchers came for a family I was helping north. I was so scared I could barely hold my rifle, but I stood my ground and eventually they backed down. What made the difference? They expected me to run. When I didn't, when I looked them in the eye and showed I was willing to die before I yielded, it confused them. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Men like Clayton are bullies. They expect others to cower. When you don't, it throws them off balance. Rebecca nodded, understanding. Thomas had been the same way, unwilling to back down when he believed something was right regardless of the consequences. By mid-morning, they had transformed the solid log house into a small fortress. Extra wood had been stacked against the windows, leaving only narrow firing slits. Water buckets stood ready in case of fire. Escape routes had been planned. It was nearly noon when they heard the first riders approaching. Freeman moved silently to a window, peering through the firing slit. 8 men, he reported. Clayton, Burke, Reynolds, and 5 others, all armed. Rebecca's mouth went dry, but she took up her position at another window, rifle ready. Remember, Freeman said quietly, let them make the first move. We need witnesses that they came looking for a fight. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the house. Clayton dismounted, walking forward alone with exaggerated confidence. Freeman, he called out. I know you're in there, we just want to talk. Freeman said nothing, watching through his slit as Clayton advanced. We've got no quarrel with you, Freeman. Just hand over the Collins woman and her papers, and we'll call it square. Still, Freeman remained silent. Clayton's face darkened with anger. Don't be a fool, boy, you're outnumbered. No one's coming to help you, no one cares what happens to a black man out here. When this too received no response, Clayton turned back to his men, gesturing angrily. 2 of them dismounted, carrying what looked like bundles of cloth. Fire torches, Freeman murmured. Get ready. The men began to advance, torches now lit and burning bright in the clear day. Rebecca's finger tightened on her trigger. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, a new sound cut through the air. Hoofbeats, many of them approaching fast from the east. Clayton and his men turned, startled, as a column of cavalry riders crested the ridge, blue uniforms stark against the snow. At their head rode Daniel, alongside a tall officer whose insignia marked him as a lieutenant. Right face! Halt! The officer bellowed, his voice carrying across the distance. The column of soldiers, at least 20 strong, wheeled and stopped with military precision, rifles at the ready. Clayton's face showed shock, then fury. This isn't army business, Lieutenant. The officer dismounted, walking forward with deliberate steps. Marshal Clayton, I presume. I'm Lieutenant James Harper, 5th Cavalry. I understand you're threatening a civilian property with armed men. We're conducting official territorial business, Clayton blustered. This black man is harboring a fugitive. Fugitive? Harper raised an eyebrow. My understanding is that the woman in question, Mrs. Collins, is a legal landowner with no charges against her. He turned toward the house. Mr. Freeman? Mrs. Collins? It's Lieutenant Harper. You can come out now. Freeman opened the door cautiously, rifle still in hand. Rebecca followed close behind. "Lieutenant," Freeman acknowledged with a nod. "You made good time." "Your man Daniel is quite persuasive," Harper replied with the hint of a smile, "particularly when he mentioned evidence of water rights fraud that might interest the governor." Clayton's face had drained of color. "Whatever Freeman told you is a lie. He's just a—" "Careful with your next words, Marshal," Harper cut in coldly. "Mr. Freeman served with me at Vicksburg. His word carries considerably more weight with me than yours." He turned to Rebecca. "Mrs. Collins, I understand you have documents regarding illegal mining operations and water rights violations." Rebecca nodded, retrieving Thomas's carefully organized evidence from the house. As she handed it to Harper, Clayton made a sudden move toward his holster. "I wouldn't," Freeman said quietly. His rifle now pointed squarely at Clayton's chest. "Not with 20 witnesses in uniform." Clayton froze, his hand hovering near his gun. "Marshal Clayton," Harper announced formally, "I am placing you under military arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder, land fraud, and violation of territorial water laws. Your men will surrender their weapons immediately." Burke started to protest, but the soldiers had already surrounded the group, rifles trained on them. "This isn't over," Clayton hissed, as a young corporal disarmed him. "You think a black man's word will stand against mine in Denver? You think a widow's scribbles will hold up in court?" Freeman met his gaze steadily. "I think 20 sworn testimonies from U.S. Army soldiers will stand up just fine. And I think the territorial governor, who owes his appointment to his stance against corruption, will be very interested in what Mrs. Collins has to show him." As Clayton and his men were led away under guard, Lieutenant Harper approached Freeman and Rebecca. "The governor's representative will be here by tomorrow," he said. "He'll want statements from both of you. In the meantime, I've left a detachment of men to secure your property, Freeman." "I'm grateful, James," Freeman replied, the formality between them dissolving now that the danger had passed. "Don't thank me yet," Harper warned. "Clayton has powerful friends. This fight is just beginning." "But at least it will be fought in the light of day," Rebecca said, "with evidence and witnesses." That's what Thomas wanted. After Harper left to supervise his men, Rebecca and Freeman stood on the porch of his home, watching as the soldiers established their camp nearby. The winter sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered ranch. "What will you do now?" Freeman asked quietly. Rebecca gazed out at the mountains where Thomas had made his discovery, mountains that had cost him his life, but might now help bring justice to the territory. "I have a homestead claim to protect," she said with new determination, "and water rights to defend. Thomas believed that land should be cared for, not exploited. I intend to honor that belief." Freeman nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It won't be easy. A woman alone." "Perhaps I won't be alone," Rebecca said, her eyes meeting his. "Thomas trusted you above all others. He was a good judge of character." Something passed between them then. Not romance, not yet, but a recognition of kindred spirits. Two people who had faced loss and injustice, yet refused to surrender. "Spring comes early to Double Creek Valley," Freeman said after a moment. "Good land for growing, plenty of water." Rebecca smiled, truly smiled, for the first time since Thomas's death. "I'd like to see it sometime." "I think that could be arranged," Freeman replied, a matching smile warming his weathered features. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, they remained on the porch, watching the changing colors paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. The battle ahead would be difficult, the journey uncertain, but for now, in this moment, they had found something precious and rare on the American frontier: safety, respect, and the promise of justice. 3 months later, the territorial governor signed an executive order establishing new protections for water rights throughout Colorado. Clayton and his associates faced trial for fraud, though murder charges proved more difficult to pursue. Some justice, it seemed, was better than none. Rebecca Collins remained on her homestead, protected now by its status as a key watershed. With Freeman's help, she established the Collins Water Trust, ensuring that the streams and rivers flowing from her land would be protected for generations to come. As for Elijah Freeman, his reputation grew throughout the territory. No longer just the Black Rancher, but a man whose courage and integrity had helped expose corruption at the highest levels. Though prejudice remained a daily reality, doors that had once been closed to him began to open. And if he was seen riding regularly to the Collins homestead, if Rebecca was often spotted at Double Springs Ranch, well, the frontier had always been a place where new beginnings were possible, where people could forge connections based not on where they came from, but on who they chose to be. Some said it wouldn't last, that society wouldn't accept such a friendship, but Rebecca and Elijah knew better. After all, they had already faced down worse odds together. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. The Black Rancher channel is dedicated to uncovering these hidden histories that shaped America, the stories of courage that never made it into our textbooks. Subscribe now and join our community of truth seekers. Every subscription helps us continue researching and sharing these powerful narratives that deserve to be told. Thank you for spending this time with us. Until our next journey into America's forgotten past, remember, real history isn't always what they taught you. Sometimes it's what they tried to make you forget.